What's life like in Britain in 2023 if you have a disability? According to a human rights watchdog today, you face worsening discrimination and an increasing risk of poverty as a result of government failures. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission accuses the government of making slow progress in improving the lives of disabled people. We'll ask what progress has been made and what else needs to be done. Also tonight is an interview in half an hour. Good evening. Disabled people in this country face worsening discrimination and a growing risk of poverty as a result of government failures to tackle problems like employment and welfare benefits. That's according to a human rights watchdog. The Equality and Human Rights Commission said successive UK governments had made little or no progress in addressing 11 policy recommendations identified by United Nations investigators in a report back in 2016. Today's report said there continued to be a disproportionate number of disabled people living on low incomes or in poverty, with some facing long waits for decisions on benefits. The Equality Act defines someone as disabled if they have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. According to the most recent census, across both England and Wales, the number of disabled people was 10.4 million. The government says it's reforming the disability benefit system and is investing $2 billion to support sick and disabled people back into work. In a moment, we'll ask what it's really like to have a disability and live in the UK in 2023. And do let me know your own experiences on WhatsApp 07977 701 980. First, here's Kate.
The UK has seen slow progress on disabled people's rights. That's the judgment of a new report from the UK Independent Mechanism, which is made up of equality and human rights commissions across the 4 nations. The progress they were assessing was since 2016, when a UN committee investigated how the UK was complying with the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
The committee found grave and systemic violations of the convention, and as a result made 11 recommendations for the UK to comply with. While there has been some limited progress in relation to some areas, none of the recommendations, the 11 recommendations made by the UN committee 7 years ago, has yet been fully implemented. And in some areas there has been no progress. So that's obviously concerning and disappointing.
The recommendations were wide-ranging, but several focused on state support. One suggested the government carry out an impact assessment on the austerity measures introduced after 2010 and the effect they had on disabled people. That recommendation, they say, has had no progress in 7 years. Another, which suggested any welfare reform should not adversely affect the human rights of disabled people, has seen limited progress, noting additional support provided during COVID has since been withdrawn. More widely, the report explains benefits have failed to keep pace with the cost of living, and disabled people often have extra costs to cover.
We're much more likely to live in poverty, but much more likely to have higher costs of living. Scope the charity estimates that the average extra cost for a disabled person is £975 a month, and that's the average. So many more people face costs higher than that.
There has been an extra disability cost of living payment. Not everyone feels it met the need.
Electricity is absolutely crippling us at the moment. For example, there's a ventilator here, electric beds, a track hoist that operates electrically, and we know when the power goes out that we're in trouble. It hasn't happened much, but over the winter we did have a few power outs, and they resulted in screaming machines, panic, worry.
Financial support wasn't the only topic. The report finds there's been little progress in combating negative and discriminatory stereotypes or prejudice, and some progress on actively consulting disabled people when evaluating legislation. The UK's National Disability Strategy was determined to be unlawful last year because of the consultation process, a decision which was overturned on appeal last month. There is some positive news. The gap in employment between disabled and non-disabled people has been narrowing over time, for example. A government spokesperson said they remain committed to making society a more inclusive and accessible place, adding there's already been significant work, including boosting disability benefits by 10.1% and investing £2 billion to support sick and disabled people back into work.
I think as a myth that there's inevitable progress on diversity issues. There's not. We have made progress happen with policy, and at the moment all the policy is going in the wrong direction.
The report will now be taken back to the UN.
We asked the government for an interview, but they declined. Let's dig more into some of the issues raised in Kate's film with Kira Lawrence, who has a learning disability and works for the charity MENCAP. James Taylor, who is Executive Director of the charity Scope, and Anne Wafula-Strike, who is a GB Paralympian wheelchair racer, who also a disability rights activist, and she says she was once forced to wet herself on a train because the disabled loo was out of order. Welcome to Newsnight, all of you. I'd like to ask each of you, and Kira, I'll start with you. What is it like for you as someone with a disability living in this country in 2023?
At the moment, living in this country in 2023, living as a person with a learning disability, there are 1.5 million people living in the UK with a learning disability. I'm just one person. I'm very lucky. I have my voice, I have my platform, and I can speak up. But there are lots of people like me in the UK who don't have my voice, and I want to help speak up for them. But we face things like stigma, attitudes, public perceptions, healthcare, housing, transport, education, employment. There are things every day that we face. Even inaccessible information can be really, really hard. So it can be really hard, and that's why people really need good support so that they can live good lives like anybody else.
James, what would you say?
Yeah, I agree. I think the report is a complete damning indictment of a government that's been asleep at the wheel for quite a long time. But we hear from disabled people day in, day out who are struggling to pay their bills. We've heard from a parent who's facing an energy bill of around £10,000 a year to keep life-saving equipment on for their disabled child. We're hearing from some people who are staying downstairs because they can't afford the electricity to switch their stair lift on and get up the stairs. We're also hearing from people being completely failed by our welfare system, being pushed to the brink with poor mental health outcomes. So for 16 million people across the UK, there is far more the government needs to be doing.
What would you say, Anne?
Yeah, I mean, it's living with a disability means that you've got to navigate every day as a new person. It's so challenging, and it's frustrating when you hear people who are actually qualified to work giving up their jobs and deciding to stay at home. Why? Because of public transport. You know, this is a means that is supposed to help them get from A to B. It's becoming almost impossible.
So what is the impact on people if the benefit system is not enough, or people with disabilities are asked to jump through hoops to get personal independence payments? What is the impact if people can't leave their home because there isn't an accessible bus or an accessible train or a disabled loo on the train that works? What is the impact if people with disabilities can't get healthcare?
Then it means that you are not a part of this society. It means that you are actually excluded, and everything about you is swept under the carpet. And that's why when you read a report like this, you sort of like ask yourself, why is this happening the way it is? And, you know, honestly, I must say that there's some really good things that the government has done. For example, recognizing the BSL language, as a language in the United Kingdom. That is a really big achievement. But I think the challenge is, Victoria, is that sometimes we make 10 steps forward and then we take 11 or 12 back. So we've ended up mark timing. It's like you want to make one system or one policy work, and then you want to take away and completely disadvantage and disempower people who really need it. For example, when we look at education, there are so many parents, with sent children who are struggling, and they still don't know where the answers will come from.
And those kind of conversations, parents of children who are struggling, parents who are struggling on behalf of their children, the inaccessibility of life, the difficulty around benefits. I have been having those conversations with people like you who've been coming onto programmes like this for at least 10 years, if not longer. And yes, progress has been made, because you've acknowledged that, and the report today acknowledges limited progress. But what does it say if we're still having these issues in 2023, James?
It says we don't value the biggest minority in this country, and we don't value their contributions to society. They don't value everything that disabled people can bring to our communities, to our workplaces, our way of thinking about how we can do things. To me, it suggests that we just do not value these people at all, that we can quite easily take people's independence away and take things away that many non-disabled people take for granted. And that is really damning.
So what has to change, Kira?
I believe that government ministers and MPs, they need to come and talk to people like me, people with a learning disability, because they'll hear their stories, they'll hear about their lives, they'll hear about the barriers they face every day of their lives. And actually, it's much more powerful when I go and share my story with somebody, because then they go, I've met someone with a learning disability and they faced bullying, they faced inaccessible letters, they faced, poor healthcare, they have faced poor housing, they faced poor employment.
But are you saying then, so the government launched a disability action plan, or consultation for its disability action plan last month. They say it aims to make the lives of disabled people easier. Some of the things it suggests in it: raising the profile of assistive technology to ensure more disabled people have access to life-changing technology, making mandatory disability awareness training for taxi drivers a thing, so it unlocks greater freedom. Are you saying that the government ministers, the Minister for Disabled People, is not talking to people with disabilities? That can't be right. That can't be true, can it?
Honestly, when you sort of look at the population of disabled people, it's very big. And I do not expect that the minister will be speaking to every individual person. And I think that's why, Victoria, that's why, disability groups are very important, because they are able to amplify the voices of their members. You mentioned about this consultation, and I am so hoping that people will feed into this consultation truthfully, without reservation, and just call it out the way it is.
Do you have faith, James, that if people like you contribute to this consultation, the government will listen?
I'd hope they'll listen, but I think they're probably asking the wrong questions. There's some lovely things that you've highlighted: better training for taxi drivers, improving accessibility of playgrounds, very, very good things. However, huge amounts of disabled households are in poverty. The welfare system isn't working. Employment isn't working for disabled people. The transport system isn't working.
So this is tinkering.
It's hard to believe that the government's saying we're going to improve the lives of disabled people on the one hand, whilst on the other threatening to close 1,000 ticket offices, which actually provide independence for lots of disabled people, is the right thing to do.
Right. And Lizzie has WhatsApped. She says disabled people, especially younger people with invisible chronic illnesses like myself, are gaslighted, abused, patronised and vilified on a daily basis, especially by the benefit system, medical situations and by the media. We are the most diverse range of people and yet have the least protection from discrimination and abuse, which shouldn't be the case, obviously, because of the Equality Act. What would be your message, Kira, then, to any government ministers who sadly couldn't be with us tonight, but who might be watching now?
Come and talk to people like me. Come and meet me. Come and hear about our lives. Come and listen to our stories. Come and listen to our messages. Make a change and change attitudes. When I go and meet with MPs and ministers and I say, please, will you listen to me? And I tell them my story, I tell them my message, and then they go, we never knew what a learning disability was. They don't even know about learning disability. But actually, once they meet me, they can go away and say, I met Kira today, she has a learning disability, and actually she's here to make real change, and we need to listen.
Yeah.
So I want them to come and meet me and the 1.5 million people living with a learning disability.
What would your message be?
I think what I would say is to really bring as many people as possible with different disabilities around the table and listen to them, listen to their views. And it's not just about the policies that will come out of this. I think what will be important is how those policies are going to be implemented. And maybe what I want to even just remind the viewers and our leaders is that this is something that we shouldn't take for granted, because disability is one of the only minorities that anyone can join anytime. So nobody should ever sit and think that it will not happen to them.
James, your message?
Invest in disabled people. Invest in our lives, invest in our futures. We can make a huge difference to society and the economy if we're given the chance, but the government needs to invest in us.
Thank you all very much for being with us on Newsnight tonight. Thank you for your time. Thank you. The Athletic website has reported that